This is the story of a night that should have been nothing but good vibes, music loud enough to shake the windows, kids screaming from Sugar Rush, and a birthday cake so big the candles looked like tiny sparklers. But what really went down felt like the universe took a perfectly normal family moment and ripped it straight into a horror movie no one asked for. This is the story of a celebration that never made it to the good part. A night that people in that neighborhood still refuse to talk about unless they drop their voice low, look over their shoulder, and make sure the wrong person isn't listening. A night where a shooter walked up to a home full of innocent kids and pulled the trigger like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The house wasn't some mansion. It was the type of place where kids leave their bikes on the lawn, where the screen door squeaks no matter how much oil someone uses on the hinges. The kind of home where birthdays feel cozy, warm, predictable. Parents bring chips, plastic cups, and drinks. Kids run around with frosting on their fingers. Someone always forgets to blow out the candles completely. Nothing fancy, nothing dangerous, just a regular little moment of happiness that should have ended with leftover cake in the fridge. Inside, the place was packed. People laughing, clinking cups, joking about who bought the cheapest gift. Someone was showing off a dance move they clearly hadn't practiced in years. Kids were darting between legs like hyperactive pinballs. Someone's aunt was arguing about who stole her seat. The kind of chaos that's normal. The kind you smile at. The kind where nothing bad ever happens. But outside, someone else was getting ready to destroy it all. The first sign wasn't gunfire. It was a weird chill someone felt on the back of their neck. A mom standing near the window said she suddenly felt something was wrong, but brushed it off like she was being dramatic. The music was loud, the room full, the air thick with the smell of cake, barbecue, and perfume. No one had any reason to think danger was sneaking up on them, but danger was already there, waiting, watching. And then it happened. A sharp crack. Just one. Quick, hard, out of place. People inside paused mid-sentence. Someone turned down the speaker, thinking maybe it was feedback. A kid laughed, thinking someone popped a balloon. But the adults stared at each other, confused, a little uneasy. Then the second crack hit, and the third. And before anyone could even process it, the windows exploded inward, spraying glass across the room like invisible knives. Chaos erupted instantly. Parents screamed their kids' names. Kids cried without understanding what was happening. Someone hit the floor and crawled under the table, knocking over drinks and plates. Someone else grabbed 2 kids and dragged them behind the kitchen counter. Someone slipped and fell because the floor was already slick with spilled juice and shattered glass. More cracks. Louder. Closer. The shooter wasn't just firing randomly. It felt deliberate. Smooth, focused, like he'd mapped out the whole room in his head before even pulling the trigger. Every bullet tore through the walls like they were paper. People were yelling, crying, trying to breathe. Someone shouted for everyone to get down, but the words got swallowed by the sound of gunfire. A dad grabbed his son and shielded him with his own body. A teen jumped behind the couch. A mother held her daughter so tight the kid could barely breathe. Someone tried to call emergency services, but the phone slipped out of their shaking hands and shattered on the floor. Every second felt like an eternity. Every sound felt like the last thing anyone might ever hear. And then the first body fell. Someone screamed, a scream so raw it didn't even sound human. Everyone panicked harder. Kids scrambled under tables, crying into their hands. Adults tried to shield whoever they could. Someone prayed out loud. Someone else kept saying, it's okay, even though nothing was okay at all. The gunfire didn't stop. It just kept going, steady, cold, mechanical, like the shooter didn't care who he hit, like he wasn't shooting at people but at shadows. The bullets ripped through balloons, tore through gift bags, shredded decorations. One moment, the room was full of color and noise and life. The next, it was a tornado of fear, Broken glass and screams. Somebody yelled for everyone to crawl toward the hallway. A few people made it. Others froze. Kids were too scared to move. One little girl curled into a ball and covered her head with her hands, shaking so hard she almost passed out. An adult grabbed her and dragged her behind the pantry door, just as another round blasted through the wall. And then, as sudden as it started, it stopped. Silence crashed into the room, heavy and suffocating. The kind of silence where every heartbeat sounded like a drum. People didn't move at first. Some didn't know if the shooter was still outside. Others were afraid the next step would make the nightmare start again. But the shooter was gone. Just vanished. When someone finally looked out the shattered window, the street was empty. No car, no footsteps, no shadow. Nothing but the distant hum of a neighborhood that had no idea a massacre had just happened. Inside the house, the aftermath didn't feel real. Broken gifts, shredded balloons, confetti stuck to blood on the floor, a slice of cake smashed under someone's shoe, the TV still playing a comedy show, completely out of place, someone crying over a child who wasn't moving, someone else shaking uncontrollably, someone whispering a name again and again, hoping for a response that never came. The air tasted like fear and gunpowder. The smell stuck in everyone's nose. Someone threw up. Someone fainted. People were stumbling around in shock, trying to understand how a birthday party turned into a war zone. When emergency services finally arrived, the entire street turned into a storm of flashing lights. Neighbors came out of their houses, horrified, whispering to each other, trying to piece together what they heard. Some cried on their porches, others stood frozen. No one could process how something so violent, so heartless, could happen that close to home. Inside, officers surveyed the scene like they were walking through a nightmare. They stepped over party hats, spilled drinks, pieces of the birthday banner, and shattered glass. Each step revealed more of the horror, the victims, the injuries, the fear carved into the faces of survivors. One officer had to step outside because the sight of the small victims broke him. Another clenched his jaw so hard his teeth hurt. One kept repeating, "Why here? Why these kids?" Detectives moved in, trying to piece together the story through the shock. They asked survivors what they saw, but most saw nothing. Just flashes, just fear, just pain. Some said they thought they saw a figure outside. Some thought the shots came from more than one direction. Some didn't remember anything at all. The neighborhood cameras were checked, but the footage was grainy, distorted, dark. A shadow here, a blur there, nothing useful. The shooter knew the angles, knew where cameras pointed, knew how to avoid being seen. This wasn't some sloppy attack. This was calculated, and that scared investigators even more. They checked shell casings, but they weren't traceable. They looked for footprints, but there were too many people running around afterward. They tried to find motive. Nothing lined up. No beef, no threats, no warning. No reason for someone to target a home full of families and kids. And that's when fear spread through the community. People started asking each other, what if it was random? What if the shooter comes back? What if he lives nearby? What if we've seen him and don't even know? Parents stopped letting their kids play outside. Birthday parties were canceled. Windows that used to stay open were now locked tight. Every loud noise made people jump. But the worst part, the shooter didn't leave a single clue behind. It was like he stepped into the world for a moment, caused hell, and then slipped into the shadows again. As investigators dug deeper, they found more confusion. The bullets hit specific angles, almost like the shooter knew the layout of the house. But no one outside the family had been inside recently. No strangers, no suspicious visitors, no one who seemed like they were studying the place. Unless the shooter wasn't a stranger, unless he knew someone inside, unless the attack wasn't random at all. just perfectly executed. That theory chilled everyone involved, because if that was true, the killer wasn't some outsider. He could have been someone the family once trusted, someone who smiled at them, someone who had a reason so dark no one had seen it coming. But no evidence proved it. Everything the detectives found led to another dead end. Every witness said something different. Some heard a car, some didn't. Some saw a figure. Some only imagined movement. Some remembered a sound that didn't match anything. Trauma had blurred reality, and meanwhile, the shooter stayed out there, living normal life, breathing free air, no remorse, no fear. Someone capable of walking up to a house full of laughing children and firing like it meant nothing. That's the kind of person investigators feared most. The kind of killer who doesn't leave a trace. The kind of killer who strikes once and might strike again. The morning after the shooting, the neighborhood woke up to a silence so heavy it felt like the whole street was holding its breath. People walked outside slowly, stepping onto their porches like the air itself might break. They stared at the house, the shattered windows, the police tape fluttering in the breeze, the dark stains on the driveway. And no one knew what to say. The place that used to have kids running across the yard now looked like it had been abandoned by life itself. Inside, investigators were still moving through the house carefully, trying to make sense of what happened. They walked past toppled chairs, footprints smeared across the floor, confetti stuck to dried blood, and a birthday banner hanging crooked with half its letters missing. It was impossible not to imagine how loud and joyful the room must have been before the gunfire ripped through it. One detective stood near the kitchen doorway, staring at a small paper crown lying on the ground. He picked it up slowly, turning it in his hands like he was trying to understand how something so innocent could end up in the middle of something so monstrous. But the crown didn't give him answers. Nothing in the house did. Another detective studied the bullet holes, the angles, the direction, the grouping. It was too precise, too trained, too deliberate. Whoever pulled that trigger wasn't guessing. They weren't panicking. They were hitting exactly what they wanted to hit. That realization sent a chill through everyone in the room because it meant this wasn't the work of someone who snapped randomly. It felt like the work of someone with experience, someone who'd done something like this before. Maybe not here, maybe not at a birthday party, but somewhere. Survivors who were well enough to talk were taken to the station. They sat in chairs, wrapped in blankets, eyes red and unfocused. Some couldn't stop shaking. Some couldn't speak without their voice cracking. They told investigators everything they remembered. The sounds, the flashes, the screams, the feeling of glass cutting into their hands, the weight of bodies falling around them. But the part that frustrated detectives was always the same. No one saw the shooter clearly. A few said they thought they saw someone wearing dark clothing. Others said maybe there was a hood. One thought they saw a mask. Another said the shooter might have been behind a tree, but they weren't sure. Trauma fractured the truth into tiny pieces, and detectives had no choice but to sift through them and hope something, anything, connected. Days went by, and the pressure on investigators grew intense. Reporters camped outside the station. People demanded answers. Families pleaded for justice. Neighbors whispered theories about who could have done it. Some blamed random violence. Others believed it was personal. And a few were terrified that the shooter might have been one of them. Someone they passed at the grocery store, someone they waved at from their car, someone who lived close enough to know every detail of that house. One lead brought detectives to a teenager who claimed he heard a vehicle speeding away. But when asked for details, he hesitated. The car was maybe dark-colored, or maybe silver. It had round headlights, or maybe square ones. The more questions detectives asked, the more confused the kid became. He wasn't lying. Trauma just scrambled the memory. Another dead end. Another lead came from a neighbor's camera that caught a shadow moving across the street. but the shadow was distorted, stretched by the angle and the motion blur. It could have been a tall man or a short one. It could have been someone wearing a jacket or someone carrying something. It wasn't proof. It wasn't even useful. Investigators started digging into the family's background. They checked phone records, messages, acquaintances, co-workers, friends, even distant relatives. They searched for any sign of conflict, arguments, threats, debts, grudges, anything that might make someone want to cause harm. But there was nothing. The family wasn't involved in anything shady. No trouble with neighbors. No history with violent people. No red flags at all. It didn't make sense. Why would someone pick this house? Why this family? Why a night filled with children? Detectives kept circling the same terrifying possibility. If there was no personal motive, then the shooter might have chosen the house simply because it was easy. Because there were many people inside. Because the lights were on. Because the music hid their approach. Because the chaos made it impossible to identify them. Because the victims were vulnerable. That thought spread fear through the community like wildfire. If it could happen once, without warning, without reason, what was stopping it from happening again? Parents refused to let their kids attend parties. Some families moved away altogether, leaving their homes dark and quiet. People installed extra locks, motion lights, security cameras. But even with all the precautions, nobody really felt safe. Because safety wasn't something you could buy anymore. Not after what happened in that house. Meanwhile, investigators kept coming back to the bullets, their grouping, their path, their entry points. Every detail screamed the same thing. The shooter knew what they were doing. That suggested training, military, law enforcement, a gang member, a hired gun, a disgruntled ex-someone from someone's past. It was impossible to narrow it down without evidence. Interviews continued. Survivors started remembering tiny details, a flash of metal, a shadow moving to the left, the sound of footsteps on gravel, or maybe on pavement. Someone thought they heard heavy breathing. Someone else heard no breathing at all, which scared them even more. The shooter felt less like a human and more like a silent force of destruction. One survivor, a kid who had been hiding under the table, finally talked after days of refusing to speak. He said he heard the shooter reload, calmly. No shaking hands, no fumbling, just a smooth, practiced movement. That detail horrified investigators. Reloading calmly during an attack wasn't something an amateur could pull off. It meant the shooter was collected, focused, unbothered by the screams. Another survivor said they remembered something strange. After the last shot, there was a long pause, like the shooter was standing there, watching, waiting, making sure the job was done. That detail shook everyone because it suggested the shooter didn't just fire blindly. They were observing the aftermath, watching the panic, maybe even enjoying it. That made the case even more disturbing. Detectives expanded their search radius. They checked nearby towns. They looked into past shootings. They analyzed patterns. But nothing matched. Either the shooter was completely new or extremely careful. Then something unusual happened. A witness from several blocks away came forward. They said they saw a figure walking calmly down the sidewalk, not running, not panicking, just walking. The timing matched the end of the attack, but the witness didn't see a face. They just saw a dark silhouette moving like they had nowhere to be. Nothing to hide, no reason to rush. Investigators rushed to follow the lead, checking cameras on the route. But again, nothing helpful. The figure always stayed in blind spots or areas with poor lighting. It was like the shooter knew exactly where cameras couldn't reach. Some officers started whispering among themselves. Was this shooter a local? Someone who walked the neighborhood often enough to know every camera, every blind angle, every escape route? That theory scared even the detectives, because if the shooter was local, they didn't just strike and disappear. They stayed. They blended in. They were possibly watching the investigation unfold from the comfort of their own home, knowing the detectives had nothing. Weeks passed and still no arrest, no name, no suspect. The files grew thicker. Leads grew colder. Pressure grew hotter. The community kept asking the same question. When will they catch him? But investigators had no answer. The families of the victims held memorials. People lit candles, left teddy bears, wrote notes. The grass near the house became a small sea of flowers and messages. Some people stopped by every day. Some prayed. Some cried silently. Some stared at the ground because looking at the house hurt too much. The survivors struggled too. Kids jolted awake from nightmares. Adults couldn't enter a room without checking every corner. Some couldn't step inside the house again. Some moved out completely. Trauma clung to them like a shadow they couldn't outrun. Then there was the guilt. The survivor's guilt. People kept asking themselves questions that tore them apart. Why did I survive? How did my kid not make it? What could I have done? What if I moved left instead of right? What if I reacted faster? But there were no answers, no explanation, no closure. Investigators didn't give up, but the deeper they dug, the more the case felt like a maze designed by someone who knew exactly how to avoid being caught. Every clue led nowhere. Every theory fell apart. Every promising lead dissolved. Some detectives believed the shooter planned the attack days in advance. Others believed it was spontaneous but still expertly executed. Some thought it was revenge. Others insisted it was random. Without evidence, every possibility stayed open, which meant the fear stayed alive too. The neighborhood changed. The street changed. The city changed. The birthday parties never returned to that house. Even when the tape was removed, even when the windows were replaced, even when the walls were repainted, something was permanently broken. The laughter that once filled that home never came back. The sense of safety that once wrapped around the street evaporated. But the part that haunted everyone the most was the ending. The silence. The shooter disappearing without leaving a trail. The empty space where justice should have been. The possibility that the person responsible was still living their life, breathing the same air, maybe even walking past the same houses. People started locking their doors earlier. Some slept with lights on. Some whispered about moving away forever, because deep down, a single terrifying thought kept eating at them. What if the shooter isn't done? What if the reason there's no motive is because the motive hasn't happened yet? What if this was just the beginning? Investigators knew the case couldn't stay cold. They kept pushing, hoping for a slip-up, a confession, a rumor, anything. But the shooter remained a ghost who walked into a family's happiest night and turned it into their darkest nightmare, then vanished without looking back. This story isn't just about violence, it's about innocence stolen, trust shattered, and fear planted so deep it'll take years to fade, if it ever does. This is the story of a killer who walked up to a home full of children and didn't hesitate. A killer who executed a plan so cleanly, the entire city was left asking the same question. Who was he? And the truth, the real truth, is that somewhere out there, someone knows. Someone has the missing piece. Someone has the answer buried deep inside a memory, a rumor, a whisper, a lie, or a truth they're scared to speak. Until that answer comes out, this case stays what it is. A nightmare with no ending. A wound that refuses to heal. A question that hangs in the air like smoke. And a story that leaves one final, chilling thought. The shooter is still out there, and he hasn't said his last word.